On every continent but one, on a single green stem in the morning light, something is multiplying. It does not hunt. It does not move. It barely seems alive at all. And yet, left alone for one season, the descendants of one of these creatures could, in theory, bury the surface of the earth. This is the aphid. Soft, slow, smaller than a grain of rice. The insect that clones itself. Tonight we look closely at the thing on the rose stem you have flicked away 1,000 times without a thought. Because under that stillness is one of the strangest engines of life science has ever measured. A body born already pregnant. A colony that thinks without a brain. An animal farmed by ants long before humans raised a single cow. Watch the stem. It is already changing. Start with the fact that sounds like a lie. One entomologist ran the arithmetic on the reproductive output of a single aphid unchecked across one growing season. The answer he reached has been repeated in scientific circles for decades. A single aphid, in theory, could produce enough descendants to cover the entire planet, not in a thin film, but in a living layer many kilometers deep. Picture that for a moment. Stand at the base of a mountain and look up. Now imagine green bodies stacked from your feet to that summit and past it, wrapping the whole curve of the world. It does not happen, of course. Birds eat them, rain drowns them, winter kills them. But the capacity is real, and it is the first thing to understand about this animal. The aphid is built around one ruthless principle: multiply faster than anything can possibly remove you. Every other fact tonight grows from that root. It feeds. It copies. It does not stop. So how many offspring does one aphid actually leave behind, not in theory in a real summer on a real plant? The honest answer is that no one can give you a clean total, because the generations pile onto each other faster than they can be counted. A single female produces somewhere between 10 and 100 young in her short life. But each of those daughters is doing the same thing within days, and each of their daughters, the lineage, does not add. It compounds. Researchers describe aphid reproduction as one of the most explosive rates of increase in the entire animal kingdom. A lineage that suits its plant perfectly can multiply without dilution, without pause copy, after identical copy, until the only limit left is the plant itself. Think of it like a single spark dropped into dry grass. Not one flame, then another. The whole field at once. That is what a founding female becomes by August. Not a mother of a brood, the origin point of a population. Scale it up from one plant to one farm and the number stops being a curiosity and starts being a threat. Under the right conditions, warm days, a healthy crop, no predators keeping pace, aphid populations can erupt into outbreaks of billions of individuals within a single field. Billions. In one field, from founders you could have covered with a single fingertip in spring. This is why agriculture treats them as a frontline enemy rather than a nuisance. A farmer can walk a field on Monday and see a scattering of green specks. By the end of the week, the undersides of the leaves are crawling, every stem furred with bodies, the whole crop sagging under a weight that was not there days before. From above, in a wide shot, the field still looks green. Lean in close, and the green is moving. The terror of the aphid was never in a single bite. It is in the arithmetic. 1 becomes 10. 10 becomes 1,000. Here is the engine behind that tide, and it runs faster than almost anything you would expect from a creature this fragile. At moderate temperatures, the time from an aphid's birth to the moment she begins producing her own young can be as short as 7 to 10 days. 7 days. From newborn to mother. Warmth speeds it up further, heat accelerates the whole cycle, packing more generations into every week of summer. Compare that to the animals we know. A human generation runs roughly 25 years. A mouse needs weeks just to reach weaning. The aphid compresses the entire arc born grown, reproducing into the span of a long weekend. And because every one of those daughters starts her own 7-day clock the moment she is born, the clocks overlap. They stack. At any moment in a summer colony, dozens of these timers are running at once, all counting down toward the same thing. More. It is not a population growing. It is a population detonating in slow motion. Now the fact that turns speed into something stranger. Through all of spring and summer, this multiplying army contains no males at all. The aphids feeding on that stem, building toward billions, are female, every single one. They reproduce without mating, without courtship, without a partner of any kind. The biological term is parthenogenesis. The plain meaning is that a female aphid does not need a male to make more aphids. She simply makes them. Copies of herself. Strip away the need for two sexes, and you strip away the single greatest brake on reproduction in the animal world. No waiting to find a mate. No half the population unable to bear young. Every individual on that plant is a fully productive factory, and all of them are running. It is worth sitting with how alien that is. An entire thriving population, feeding, defending itself, spreading across a field, and not one male among them for months on end. A society of clones, daughters of daughters of daughters, stretching back to a single founding mother in spring. The males do come, but not yet. And when they finally appear, it will mean something is ending. Watch an aphid feed and you will see almost nothing happen. No chewing, no tearing, just a small body motionless pressed to a stem. That stillness hides what is actually going on beneath the surface. The aphid is not eating leaves the way a caterpillar does. It has tapped directly into the plant's circulatory system. Plants move sugar and nutrients through a network of internal vessels called the phloem, the living pipework that carries food from the leaves to the roots and back. The aphid threads a needle straight into that pipeline and drinks from the current. This is theft at the source. A caterpillar takes a bite from the edge. The aphid taps the artery, and because the plant's own pressure pushes sap outward, the aphid barely has to work. It opens the valve, and the food flows in. Multiply that by thousands of bodies on one plant, all drinking from the same internal supply, and you have a crop being quietly drained from the inside, while it still looks for a while perfectly healthy. The leaves curl. The growth stunts. The plant starves with its skin intact. The aphid's bite is harmless. What rides in on that bite is not. As an aphid moves from plant to plant, probing the phloem of one and then another, it carries plant viruses on its mouthparts and in its body, and injects them as it feeds. The aphid itself is rarely the thing that kills the crop. It is the courier, the vector, the carrier of a disease it does not suffer from. This should sound familiar. It is the same grim logic that makes the mosquito the deadliest animal in human history, a small body that delivers something far worse than its own bite. The aphid plays that role in the plant world. Potato viruses, beet viruses, dozens of crop plagues move across whole regions on the mouthparts of insects too light to feel land on your hand. A single infected aphid, probing one plant for only seconds before moving on, can seed a disease that spreads through an entire field. It does not even need to settle. A taste is enough to leave the poison behind. The bite heals. The infection does not. Put the draining and the disease together, and you get one of the most costly insects on the planet. Aphids are counted among the most economically important crop pests in the world. They attack grains, vegetables, fruit trees, ornamentals, the staples of agriculture across every farming continent. The damage they cause in lost yield and ruined harvest, and the constant war to control them, runs into figures that strain belief for a creature this small. Think of it this way. Somewhere on Earth, at every moment, a farmer is losing part of a livelihood to an animal lighter than a snowflake. Not to one aphid, to the tide that one aphid becomes. And the cost is not only the crop. It is the spraying, the scouting, the resistant lineages that shrug off the chemicals meant to stop them. It is an arms race that has run for as long as humans have planted things in rows. We have fought this insect for the entire history of agriculture. We are still fighting it. We have not won. The aphid is not a single creature. It is a vast family, and nearly every member shares the same trick. Scientists recognize somewhere around 4,500 to 5,000 species of aphid worldwide. Green ones, black ones, woolly white ones, root dwellers, gall makers, tree specialists. They differ in color, in host plant, in lifestyle, but under that variety runs a single thread. Among all those thousands of species, not one is known that has fully abandoned the parthenogenetic generation. Not one. Every aphid lineage on Earth, however strange its particular life has become, still carries the engine of cloning at its core. That is a remarkable kind of unity. Imagine a family of thousands of cousins scattered across every continent in every climate, eating every kind of plant, and all of them without exception share one inherited defining habit. Copy yourself. Skip the mail. Multiply. It is the family signature. The thing that makes an aphid, no matter what it looks like. Ask any gardener about aphids, and you will hear the same thing. The plant was clean yesterday. This morning it is covered. That sense of sudden appearance is not an illusion, and it is not usually an invasion from outside. It is the 7-day clock and the cloning engine working together, hidden until the numbers cross the line where your eye finally catches them. A few founding females arrive on a fresh shoot, often winged, having drifted in on the air. They settle. They begin producing daughters who produce daughters, all of them too few and too small to notice. The population is doubling in the dark of your inattention, and then it crosses a threshold, and what was invisible becomes a crust of bodies on every tender stem. Stand close enough to an infested shoot, and you can see them shift, a slow, restless crawl across the surface, hundreds of soft green backs catching the light. Nothing appeared overnight. The bloom was building the whole time just beneath the count your eye could keep. You only saw the moment it spilled over. Return now to the mouth, because the instrument that drains the plant deserves a closer look. Up close, it is a piece of natural engineering as fine as anything in the insect world. The aphid's feeding tube is called a stylet, a hair-thin, flexible probe, far longer than it first appears, kept coiled and sheathed when not in use. To reach the phloem, the aphid does not stab bluntly inward. It threads the stylet between the plant's cells, steering along the path of least resistance, navigating through living tissue toward a target it cannot see. This is microsurgery performed by an insect with no eyes on the job. The stylet feels its way to a single vessel buried inside. The stem slides in and locks on. Some aphids can leave that probe embedded and feed for hours, even days, anchored to the plant's bloodstream. From a wide view, the aphid is doing nothing at all. Zoom to the scale of cells, and a precise living needle is winding its way to the one channel worth reaching. The terror of this animal was never force. It is finesse multiplied past counting. We built chemicals to stop them. Some lineages simply stopped noticing, because aphids reproduce by copying a single individual that happens to survive a pesticide, can become the founder of millions that share its survival. Whatever genetic quirk let her live, every daughter inherits perfectly without dilution. A vulnerability that takes other species many generations of mating to spread can race through an aphid population in a single summer. This is how so-called superclones arise, lineages so successful, so resistant, that they come to dominate the farms of whole regions. Not the fittest of a varied crowd, but one winning copy reproduced into an empire. Think of it as a counterfeiter who prints one flawless forgery, then runs the press until the forgery is the only currency left. The chemical that worked last year washes over them this year and does nothing. The clone has already won. It is the dark side of the copying engine. The same trick that makes them multiply makes them adapt and stay one step ahead of every weapon we bring. By the time a plant looks sick, the aphids have been winning for a while. An aphid-stressed plant shows its slowly leaves yellowing, new growth curling and puckering, shoots stunted and deformed. But these are late symptoms. The draining of the phloem, the viral infection, the quiet starvation all began well before the plant's appearance gave it away. The visible wound trails the real one by days. This lag is part of what makes the aphid so effective. A predator that mauls its prey announces itself. The aphid does its work invisibly inside the plant's plumbing and lets the consequences surface on their own schedule. You react to a problem that is already established. Picture a slow leak behind a wall. By the time the stain shows on the paint, the damage inside is extensive. The aphid is that leak, soft, silent, and ahead of you. You are not catching the infestation when you see it. You are catching up to it. There is a particular density an aphid colony reaches that has to be seen to be believed. On a heavily infested shoot, the individual insects stop being individual. They pack so tightly layered over one another along the stem that the plant itself vanishes beneath them. The green of the leaf gives way to the green of the swarm. What you are looking at is no longer a stem with aphids on it. It is a stem made on its surface entirely of aphids. From above, the cluster reads as a single textured mass, faintly shifting like the stem itself has grown a restless skin. This is the moment the arithmetic becomes physical. The doubling, the 7-day clock, the cloning, all of it ends here, in a visible crust of life thick enough to hide the thing it is killing. And the colony is not finished. Even now, under that crust, new daughters are being born into the crowd, each already carrying the next generation inside her. There is almost nowhere on Earth you can go to escape them. Aphids are found on every continent except Antarctica. Tropics, temperate zones, deserts with the right plants, the cold edges of the far north wherever there is vegetation to drain some, aphid lineage has reached it and settled in. The family's variety is exactly what lets it occupy nearly the whole living world. This is not the range of a fragile creature. It is the footprint of a conqueror, to spread across every landmass, but the frozen one, an animal has to survive heat and cold, drought and damp, hundreds of different host plants and thousands of different enemies. The aphid has done it not by being tough in any one body, but by being endlessly rapidly replaceable. Wherever you are reading this, unless you are standing on Antarctic ice, there are aphids within a short walk of you. On a weed, on a tree, on the rose by the door. You are never far from the green tide. The aphid has no shortage of enemies. Ladybugs devour them, lacewing larvae hunt them, wasps parasitize them, birds pick at them, fungi rot them from within, and still the colonies thrive. The question is how? The answer is brutally simple. The aphid does not survive by escaping predators. It survives by outrunning them reproductively. A ladybug can eat dozens of aphids in a day, and the colony can replace them faster than she can swallow. The losses are real. They are also against the math of cloning and the 7-day clock almost irrelevant. This is a different survival strategy than most of nature uses. The aphid does not gamble on any single life. It gambles on the rate. Lose 1,000 to predators, and 10,000 are already being born to take their place. It is survival by surplus. By sheer overwhelming production, the predators are not failing, they are simply bailing water from a boat that fills faster than they can scoop, and the aphid, individually fragile, dies by the millions and does not care. The lineage rolls on. We have circled it from every side, so let us name it plainly. The thing that makes the aphid frightening is not any weapon, it is exponential growth. Most threats in nature scale in a straight line. One more predator, one more bite, one more degree of danger. The aphid scales by multiplication. 1 becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, 100 becomes 10,000, and each step happens in the time it takes the one before it, so the curve does not climb. It launches. The human mind is famously poor at feeling this kind of growth. We sense addition easily and multiplication badly. We look at a few aphids and estimate a small problem because our instincts add when they should be multiplying. By the time the curve is obvious, it is already past us. That gap between how slowly we perceive the threat and how fast it actually compounds is the aphid's true weapon. Not the stylet, not the virus, the math. A creature you could crush without thinking, governed by an equation you cannot quite feel. So we close the dread where it lives in the silence before the count tips over. Everything frightening about the aphid happens quietly and ahead of you. The feeding is invisible inside the plant. The reproduction is hidden in numbers too small to notice until they are not. The damage trails behind the cause. The growth outpaces your sense of it. At no point does the aphid announce itself. It simply crosses one ordinary morning from unseen to undeniable. There is something colder in that than in any predator's charge. A wolf gives you the courtesy of fear. The aphid gives you nothing to fear until the fearful thing is already done, the stem furred, the leaves curling the field below, quietly losing. A creature lighter than a raindrop, slower than the plant it kills. And against it, an entire history of agriculture has fought to a standstill. Now look closer at the body itself. Because the strangest thing about the aphid is not how many it makes, it is how. And the answer hidden inside that small, soft shape is stranger than anything its numbers could prepare you for. Here is where the aphid stops being a pest and becomes one of the strangest animals on Earth. When an aphid is born in the warmth of summer, she is already carrying her own developing daughters inside her body, not eggs to be fertilized later, daughters growing present from the moment of her own birth. She enters the world pregnant. The scientists who study this describe it plainly enough. The aphid appears to be born already expecting. Sit with how that breaks the rules you carry without thinking. In almost every animal you know, life runs in tidy order. Be born, grow up, then reproduce. The aphid collapses that order into a single moment. Birth and pregnancy are not stages apart. They arrive together, folded into the same body on the same day. This is the phenomenon biologists call telescoping of generations. The name is precise. The generations do not follow one another. They slide inside one another, nested like the closing sections of a telescope pushed shut. And it goes deeper than a mother and her young. Far deeper. Because those daughters she carries are not the end of what she contains. Look at a single aphid on a leaf and understand what you are actually looking at. You are not seeing one animal. You are seeing a mother, her daughters developing inside her, and inside those daughters the beginnings of granddaughters, all alive, all present, all housed within the same small body at the same time. 3 generations stacked. One creature on the surface, 3 layered within. A researcher described it in a line that has stayed with me, that when you look at an aphid, you are looking at a grandmother, a mother, and a granddaughter all at once in the same skin. Try to picture the equivalent in human terms, and the mind refuses it. A newborn girl who already holds her future children, and those children already holding theirs, all of them real, all of them living before the first has taken a breath of her own. It is grotesque and astonishing in equal measure, and for the aphid, it is simply Tuesday. The body on that leaf is not an individual, it is a lineage compressed. There is a second strange thing folded into the first. These summer daughters are not laid as eggs. They are born live. Most of the insect world runs on eggs laid sealed, left to develop outside the mother. The summer aphid abandons that entirely. She gives birth to active walking young, already formed, already feeding within hours, already carrying the next generation. The term is viviparity, live birth, and in an insect this small it is genuinely unusual. This is part of what makes the speed possible. An egg has to be laid, then survive, then hatch, time lost at every step. The aphid skips all of it. Her daughter does not wait in a shell. She steps straight onto the plant and begins her own 7-day clock immediately. There is something almost mammalian in it, which is the last word you would expect for a creature like this. No nest of eggs, no waiting, a continuous live rolling production line of daughters, each emerging ready to run. The egg comes back later when winter forces the issue. But all summer the aphid does not lay. It gives birth, and every one of those live-born daughters is genetically identical to her mother, a clone. Because summer reproduction skips fertilization entirely, no male, no mixing, the daughter is not a blend of 2 parents. She is a copy of one. Same genes, same traits, same instructions reproduced with only the faint blur of the occasional random mutation. The mother does not pass on half of herself. She passes on all of herself again. This is why the colony on a stem is not a population in the ordinary sense. It is one individual multiplied. The 100 green bodies you see are genetically the same aphid wearing 100 coats. A single self distributed across a plant. It reframes everything about how they behave. When one of them releases an alarm and the others flee, that is not a community warning its members. It is a body protecting its other parts. They share genes the way your cells do, which means in the cold logic of evolution they share a single fate. The clone is not a group. It is one life scattered. Let us go back inside the body, because the architecture of those nested generations is worth seeing clearly. The developing daughters sit in neat internal rows lined up within the mother's reproductive structures, and inside the most advanced of those daughters, the earliest germ cells of the granddaughters are already taking shape. It is layering within layering. A daughter inside the mother, the seed of a granddaughter inside the daughter, each enclosed by the last. The comparison everyone reaches for is the Russian nesting doll, and for once the comparison is exact rather than decorative. Open the figure and find a smaller figure inside. Open that and find another. The aphid is that toy made flesh, except the dolls are alive and developing and counting down toward birth. One naturalist wondered, half joking, whether the nesting might continue further still, generations within generations, like a hall of mirrors running on forever. As far as anyone can tell, it does not. The layers stop at a finite few, but the image lingers because it is almost true. A body that contains its own descendants folded inward toward a vanishing point. This nesting is not just a curiosity. It is the secret behind the speed that made the first half of tonight so alarming. Remember the 7-day clock, born to reproducing in barely a week? Telescoping is why. Because a daughter is already partly built inside her mother before that mother is even born, development gets a running start. The granddaughter is not begun from scratch at the granddaughter's birth. She was started generations early inside her grandmother. The work is done in advance, in parallel, overlapping. Think of it as an assembly line where the next product begins being built before the current one is finished, and the one after that begins before that. 3 machines running at once, staggered so that finished units roll off far faster than any single machine could manage alone. That is how an animal collapses a generation into a week. Not by rushing each life, but by building 3 lives simultaneously, each tucked inside the last. The time is not saved. It is overlapped. The dread of the exponential bloom and the uncanny nesting of bodies are the same fact seen from 2 sides. We met the stylet earlier in the language of theft. Look at it again now in the language of strangeness, because as an anatomical object it is deeply peculiar. The aphid's mouth is not a mouth in any sense you would recognize. It is a set of needle-thin filaments, bundled and sheathed far longer than the head that holds them, that must be deployed, steered and threaded through living plant tissue toward a vessel the aphid will never see. When not in use, much of this apparatus is coiled away inside the body like a line waiting to be cast. What unsettles is the precision of something this blind. The stylet navigates between cells, reading chemical and physical cues along the way, hunting for the single sweet channel of the phloem buried in the stem. It is feeling its way through a body that is not its own toward a destination known only by signal. Up close at the scale where the stylet works, the gentle aphid on the rose is performing a continuous act of microsurgery on a patient that cannot resist. The softness is on the outside. The instrument within is exact, alien, and built for one purpose. A body optimized like the mosquito's 6 blades, like every animal we have ever called, perfectly designed for the one thing it was made to do. The stylet has to reach the phloem. But the phloem is not on the surface. It is buried deep inside the stem, a thin channel hidden among many other tissues, and the aphid must locate it without sight, working entirely by feel and chemistry. As the stylet winds inward, it tastes its way forward. The aphid samples the cells it passes, reading the chemical signatures of the plant's interior, correcting its path, searching for the particular taste of the sap channel it wants. Probe, sample, adjust. A blind search through living tissue toward an invisible target, guided only by the changing flavor of what the needle touches. When it finally strikes the phloem, the aphid knows by the taste of sugar and the pressure of flowing sap. The search ends. The lock engages. The feeding begins. Imagine threading a wire through a wall to find a single hidden pipe, not by any map, but purely by the way the wire tastes wetter as it nears the water. That is the aphid's feeding every time on every plant, a navigation problem solved in the dark by an animal with no idea where it is going except closer. It is patient, precise, and faintly eerie to picture. The stillness on the surface hides a long, searching journey within. Now, look at the rear of the aphid and you will see something no other insect order wears quite this way. 2 small tubes rising from the abdomen like a pair of exhaust pipes mounted on its back. These are the cornicles, and they are one of the aphid's signature features. For a long time, people assumed they were where the honeydew came out, the sugary waste. They were wrong. The cornicles do something stranger and more defensive, which we will come to in full when the colony reveals its chemical mind. For now, simply notice them. 2 raised tubes, paired and symmetrical, found on aphids across the family. They give the aphid an oddly machine-like silhouette when you see it up close, a soft green body with two ports standing up from the back, as though the creature were built rather than born. What comes out of those tubes is not waste at all. It is a chemical weapon and a chemical voice, and we will hear it speak soon enough. But the strangeness for now is simply structural. Most insects do not have these. The aphid does. A defining piece of hardware mounted and ready on a body you assumed had no defenses at all. Here is a detail that turns the aphid's feeding from active to almost passive and makes it stranger for it. The phloem the aphid taps is under pressure. The plant pushes sap through that channel with real force, driving food from where it is made to where it is needed. So when the aphid pierces the line, it does not have to suck very hard. The plant does much of the work. The sap is pushed into the aphid by the plant's own internal pressure, flowing through the stylet under a force the aphid never had to generate. This is why an aphid can feed for hours, even days, locked to one spot. The effort is minimal. It opens the tap and the plant fills it, and the volume that passes through is enormous relative to the aphid's size. Phloem sap is rich in sugar, but thin in the nutrients the aphid truly needs, so it must process a great deal of liquid to extract enough of what matters. Sap pours in under pressure far more than the body can use, and the excess has to go somewhere, which brings us to the other end of the animal and to one of the most consequential droppings in all of nature. What flows out of the aphid is the overflow of all that pressurized feeding, and it is sweet, because the aphid drinks far more sap than it can use, mining it for scarce nutrients while sugar floods through in surplus. The excess is excreted almost continuously. This sugary waste has a name you may know without knowing its source: honeydew. The sticky film that coats cars parked under certain trees, that makes leaves shine and turn tacky in summer, that ants chase with such devotion. Much of it is aphid honeydew raining invisibly from the colonies above. Pause on what this means. The aphid is, in effect, a small living fountain of sugar water, dripping a sweet residue onto everything below as a simple byproduct of feeding. It is waste, and yet it is one of the most sought-after substances in the insect world. We will see what the ants do with it and how the aphid learned to weaponize that hunger. For now, hold the image. A creature that drains a plant from the inside and drips sweetness from behind, coating the world beneath it in a sticky, glittering residue it never meant to make. The honeydew is an accident. It will become a currency. Now, the strangest fact about the aphid's body, and one of the strangest in all of biology: the aphid cannot survive on sap alone, so it carries another organism inside itself to make up the difference. Phloem sap is rich in sugar, but missing key amino acids, the building blocks the aphid needs to grow and reproduce. The aphid cannot make these itself. Neither can the plant supply them. So tucked inside special cells in the aphid's body lives a bacterium, a partner called Buchnera, that manufactures exactly the nutrients the sap lacks. This is not an infection. It is a merger. The aphid and the bacterium have lived together so long, so completely, that neither can survive without the other. The aphid provides shelter and raw sugar. The bacterium provides the missing chemistry. Together they make one functioning life out of two organisms that alone would both fail. Think of it as a factory that cannot make its own most important part, housing a tiny supplier permanently on site, walled into the building, fed and protected in exchange for an endless stream of the one component the factory cannot produce. The aphid you flick off a leaf is not one creature. It is a partnership sealed inside cells older than you can easily imagine. It is worth pausing on exactly what this hidden partner provides, because it explains why the aphid can live on a diet that would starve almost anything else. Plant sap is nutritionally a strange and unbalanced meal, a flood of sugar with crucial pieces missing. An animal trying to build bodies and bear young on sap alone would run short of the essential amino acids that all proteins require. The aphid solves this not with its own biology, but with borrowed biology. The Buchnera bacteria synthesize those missing amino acids and hand them over, filling the exact gaps the diet leaves open. It is a division of labor written into the cells. The aphid handles drinking, defense, reproduction, movement. The bacterium handles a slice of metabolic chemistry. The aphid's own genes simply cannot perform. Each does what the other cannot. Neither could swap roles. This is why aphids can colonize a food source most insects cannot exploit and thrive on it. The sap that is too poor to sustain others sustains the aphid because the aphid does not face the sap alone. It brings a chemist with it everywhere, sealed inside. The success that opened this whole episode, the bloom the billions, rests partly on a bacterium too small to see doing work the aphid forgot how to do millions of years ago. And here is where the two great strangenesses of the aphid meet, the cloning and the bacterium, and become one thing. When a summer aphid gives birth to her cloned daughter, she does not just pass on her genes. She passes on her bacteria too. The Buchnera are placed directly into the developing daughter, inside the mother's body, transferred down the line so that every clone is born already carrying her own internal chemists ready to work from the first day. So the nested generations we marveled at earlier are not just nested aphids, they are nested partnerships. Inside the mother is a daughter, inside the daughter the seed of a granddaughter, and inside each of them the bacterial line handed down, unbroken, alongside the aphid line, generation, tucked within generation, partner within partner. This is why the merger has lasted so long. The bacterium never has to find a new host. It is simply included automatically in every birth, riding the same cloning engine that copies the aphid, copied right along with her. Two lineages, aphid and bacterium, bound together and reproduced as one for so many millions of years that the boundary between them has nearly dissolved. A single small body on a leaf, and inside it generations, and inside those more generations, and threaded through all of them a second form of life carried down forever. Look at a typical summer aphid, and you will notice what it lacks. No wings. It is built to stay. For most of the warm season, the aphids on a plant are wingless, soft, rounded, anchored to the stem they were born on. They do not need wings because they are not going anywhere. The food is here, the plant is theirs. Every daughter is born onto the same shoot her mother fed on, and there she stays, feeding and birthing the next, a settled population with no intention of travel. This is a body shaped by abundance. When the living is easy, the aphid invests nothing in flight. Wings are expensive muscle structure, energy, and pointless when you are sitting on an unlimited meal. So the summer aphid skips them entirely and pours everything into the one thing that matters, making more of itself. It gives the colony an oddly grounded, almost plant-like quality. They do not roam, they do not patrol, they sit fixed in place like fruit that drinks instead of ripening. But the aphid has a second body in reserve, a winged one, and the moment conditions turn, it can summon that other form into being. We will come to that transformation. For now, mark the strangeness, an animal that can choose generation by generation whether its children will have wings at all. Aphids come in colors, and the colors are not random decoration. They are camouflage, chemistry, and consequence. The familiar garden aphid is green the better, to vanish against a leaf or stem hidden in plain sight from the birds and ladybugs that hunt by eye. But there are black aphids, grey ones, woolly white ones, and some that are a deep, startling red. The pigments behind some of these colours are unusual in the animal world. Certain aphids produce reddish tones through pigments more often associated with fungi and plants than with insects, a quiet chemical oddity tucked into their bodies. Colour can shift the odds of survival in subtle ways. A green aphid hides from a sharp-eyed bird. A red one may be more visible to that bird but less appealing or differently defended against another enemy entirely. Within a single species, green and red forms can coexist, each doing better against a different predator. A small standing hedge against the world's many ways of eating you. Up close, a mixed colony is more varied than you would expect. Green bodies and red bodies side by side on the same stem, the same lineage, wearing different coloured coats for different reasons. It is a reminder that even at this scale, nothing is arbitrary. The colour is an argument with the world about how to stay alive. Step back and hold the contradiction at the centre of this animal. Everything it does is vast. The thing itself is almost nothing. An aphid weighs a fraction of what a single raindrop weighs. You could lose one in the crease of your palm and never feel it land. And yet, this is the creature that drains crops across continents, carries plagues between fields, founds populations of billions, and houses entire partnerships and generations inside a body smaller than a sesame seed. There is a particular kind of unease in that mismatch. We expect consequence to come in proportion to size. The lion is large because it does large things. The aphid violates the expectation, completely trivial, in body immense in effect. The scale of what it does and the scale of what it is do not match, and the gap is unsettling. It is the mosquito's lesson again in a different key. The deadliest things are rarely the biggest. Sometimes the whole weight of a problem rides on a body you could brush away without noticing it was there. Hold the aphid up to the light, and it is barely a fleck. Set it loose on a continent, and it is a force. Now consider how the aphid looks to a predator. It looks like the easiest meal in the world. It is soft-bodied, no shell, no armor, no sting you can see. It is slow. It does not flee with any speed, does not bite back with any force, does not hide once a colony has grown dense enough to coat a stem. To a ladybug or a lacewing larva, an aphid colony must look like a buffet laid out and abandoned. Rows of plump, motionless, undefended bodies packed together asking to be eaten, and they are eaten constantly in enormous numbers. By every standard of individual self-defense, the aphid is a failure. It cannot protect its own life. But that apparent helplessness is a kind of misdirection and one of the deepest strange truths of this animal. The aphid does not defend the individual. It never tried to. Its defenses operate at the level of the colony and the lineage, in chemistry and coordination and sheer replacement in ways the soft, single body gives no hint of. The helplessness you see is real for one aphid and irrelevant for the clone. The defenseless look is the disguise. What protects the aphid is not on the body you are looking at. It is in the crowd and in the chemistry, and we are about to watch it switch on. For a creature that navigates, finds plants, detects enemies, and times its whole life to the season, the aphid carries remarkably little equipment. It has eyes, compound eyes, capable of sensing light and movement enough to register a shadow falling or a predator's approach. It has antennae, and these are the real instruments sensitive to chemistry, to the scent of the right host plant, to the alarm signals of its own kind, to the touch of an ant's request for honeydew. Not much by the standards of a hunting insect, but enough. What is striking is how much the aphid accomplishes with this spare sensory kit. It locates the correct plant species out of all the green in a landscape. It reads the length of the day well enough to overhaul its entire reproductive strategy with the seasons. It detects an attack and triggers a chemical alarm that ripples through the colony. All of it, run through a minimal set of sensors on a minimal body. The antennae do the heavy work, chemical antennae on a chemical creature in a world it reads largely through smell and taste rather than sight. The aphid does not need to see the world clearly. It needs to smell it correctly. And it does. A small toolkit used with surprising reach. The intelligence you begin to suspect is not in the parts. It is in how they are used. We close the uncanny stage where it has quietly been heading all along with the realization that an aphid is not one organism in any ordinary sense, no matter how you look at it. Consider what we have found inside that single body on the leaf. It holds 3 generations of aphids nested. It holds the bacterial partners that make its life possible, sealed in its cells and passed down forever. And it is itself only one copy of a clone that may number in the thousands across a single plant, a distributed self scattered across stems, sharing genes and fate. So, what exactly is the thing on the leaf? Not an individual, not cleanly. It is a generation stacked inside a generation. It is 2 species fused into one working life. And it is a single fragment of a much larger genetic self that spreads copy by copy across the whole colony. A colony of colonies. A creature whose boundaries refuse to stay where you draw them. Point at one aphid, and you have pointed at a lineage, a partnership, and a crowd all at once. It should feel strange because it is strange. We are built to see one body as one life. The aphid does not honor that arithmetic, and once you stop expecting it to a deeper question, opens not what the aphid is, but what it can do together. Because this scattered, nested, partnered creature, soft and slow and seemingly mindless, is about to reveal something no single one of those bodies could possess on its own. A kind of intelligence spread across thousands of clones written in chemistry, with no brain anywhere in charge. Stop thinking of the colony as a crowd. Because every aphid on that stem is a clone, genetically identical to its neighbors, the colony shares something. When one aphid's genes succeed, they succeed in all of them because they are all of them. When one dies childless, the loss is shared by every copy. Scientists describe the aphid colony as essentially a superorganism, a collection of bodies behaving in the ways that matter to evolution, like a single distributed creature. This changes everything about how they can act. In most species, cooperation is a gamble, help another and you might be helping a rival. Among clones, there are no rivals. Helping the colony is helping yourself exactly with no dilution. The math that usually makes selfishness pay simply does not apply here. So the aphids can do something startling. They can sacrifice. They can warn. They can defend one another at a cost to themselves, because the self being protected is not the single body, it is the shared lineage spread across the plant. Watch the colony now, not as hundreds of small animals, but as one large one, thinking with chemistry scattered across a stem. Because that is what is about to happen. When an aphid is attacked, it does not scream. It releases a smell, and that smell is a word the whole colony understands. The moment a predator seizes an aphid, the victim emits a volatile chemical, a compound called beta-farnesene, the main ingredient of the aphid alarm pheromone. It rises off the body and spreads through the air around the colony, invisible, fast, carrying a single unmistakable meaning: danger is here right now. This is language reduced to its purest form. One molecule, one message. No grammar, no nuance, just the chemical equivalent of a shouted warning, broadcast the instant a body is grabbed. And because the colony is a clone, the warning is not charity. The dying aphid is warning copies of itself. There is something almost noble in it when you understand the genetics. The aphid being eaten spends its last act releasing a signal that saves its sisters who are genetically itself. It is not warning strangers. It is warning the rest of its own scattered body to pull back from the danger that found this part of it. A scent that means flee, released by the one who no longer can. When that alarm scent reaches the other aphids, their response is immediate and a little astonishing. Many of them let go of the plant and fall. The aphids nearest the signal stop feeding, withdraw their stylets and drop straight off the stem to the ground below, abandoning the meal, abandoning the position, choosing the gamble of the fall over the certainty of the predator. Others simply walk rapidly away from the source of the smell. The colony, packed and motionless a second ago, erupts into evacuation. Think about what that fall costs. The aphid is leaving its food, its anchored feeding spot, the warmth and safety of the colony, to tumble into the unknown of the soil, where it may not find its way back, where new dangers wait. It is a real sacrifice, taken on the strength of a smell alone. But against a predator working through the colony, a risky escape beats a certain death. Stand close to an aphid colony when a ladybug arrives, and you would see it happen. A sudden cascade of green bodies releasing their grip and raining down off the stem, the crowd thinning in seconds where the alarm has spread. One molecule and the colony pours itself onto the ground to survive. Here the aphid does something cleverer than simply fleeing. It marks its attacker, turns the predator itself into a walking alarm. Remember the cornicles, the two tubes on the aphid's back. When a predator strikes, the aphid can discharge droplets from those tubes directly onto the attacker, daubing it with fluid laced with the alarm pheromone. The predator is now coated in the scent of danger. As it moves through the colony, hunting its next meal, it carries the warning with it, a cloud of flea traveling on the body of the very thing the aphids are fleeing from. This is a remarkable inversion. The hunter becomes the signal. Everywhere the marked predator goes, aphids scatter ahead of it, alerted by the scent it cannot wash off. Its own movement spreads the alarm faster and farther than the colony could on its own. Researchers have watched this play out, aphids smearing their cornicle droplets onto predators, turning each attack into a self-spreading warning that ripples outward as the marked enemy advances. The aphid cannot fight the ladybug, so it does something better. It writes danger on the ladybug's back in a language every aphid can read and lets the predator carry the message for it. Put those last pieces together and you see the full design, an alarm system that does not just sound once but moves. A predator enters the colony. It seizes an aphid. That aphid releases the pheromone and, if it can, marks the predator with cornical droplets. The nearby aphids smell the alarm and flee, dropping, scattering, pulling back. And the marked predator, now carrying the scent, moves deeper into the colony, broadcasting the warning ahead of itself as it goes. The alarm is not a fixed point. It is a wave traveling on the predator's own body, clearing aphids out of its path before it can reach them. It means the colony's defense scales with the threat. A predator that moves more, hunts more, spreads the warning more. The harder it tries to feed, the more thoroughly it announces itself, and the more aphids escape ahead of it. There is a strange elegance to a defense that turns the attacker's effort against it. The aphids have no fortress, no weapons that can kill a ladybug. What they have is information and a way to make the predator itself deliver it faster than they ever could. A traveling warning riding the hunter through the herd. The cornicles do more than carry a scent. The droplets they release can physically disable an attacker. The fluid that comes out of those tubes is rich in triglycerides, fats that dry fast on contact, forming a sticky, hardening glue. When an aphid smears this onto a predator, it does not just mark it with a smell. It can gum up the attacker's mouthparts, foul its jaws, glue its legs or antennae, jamming the very tools the predator needs to feed. A small parasitic wasp trying to lay an egg in an aphid can find its ovipositor stuck, its attack ruined by a daub of fast-drying fat. So the cornicle secretion is a double weapon. Chemically, it is a warning spreading the alarm pheromone. Physically, it is a glue capable of disabling the enemy outright. One droplet does both jobs at once, alerting the colony and sabotaging the attacker in a single discharge. Up close, the moment is almost violent in its precision, the aphid, soft and slow, twisting to plant a bead of hardening fluid exactly where it will do the most damage, on the mouth or the limbs of something many times its size. The defenseless body, it turns out, was never quite defenseless. It just kept its weapons mounted on its back, loaded and waiting. There is one more trick hidden in that cornical fluid, and it is strange enough to have earned its own line in the scientific record decades ago. The wax in some aphids' cornical secretions has an unusual physical property. It can supercool, staying liquid below the temperature at which it ought to solidify, then snapping into a solid the instant it is disturbed. When a predator touches it, the shock of contact can trigger the wax to set almost instantly, seizing onto whatever touched it. An old paper in the scientific literature described this defense memorably as defense by smear protection through a substance that hardens at the enemy's touch. This is chemistry as a trap. The fluid waits in a delicate, unstable state, poised on the edge of solidifying, until an attacker's contact tips it over and locks it solid around them. The predator's own touch springs the mechanism. It is the kind of detail that makes you reconsider the whole animal. We began the night thinking of the aphid as a passive smear of green on a stem, and here it is carrying a supercooled chemical trap on its back, primed to freeze solid around anything that reaches for it. Soft, slow, and quietly armed with physics most engineers would admire. The colony is cleverer than its bodies suggest, and we have only reached the warnings. We have not yet reached the decisions. The alarm pheromone does more than make aphids flee. It can change what their children become. When aphids are exposed to that scent of danger, the same beta-farnesene that triggers the drop-and-flee response, something deeper shifts. Mothers exposed to the alarm begin producing a higher proportion of winged offspring. The signal of present danger reaches forward into the next generation and rewrites it. The daughters are born with wings their mothers never had, built to do the one thing their mothers could not leave. Read the logic of it. A persistent predator means this plant has become dangerous. The colony's answer is not only to flee in the moment, but to manufacture a generation capable of escaping the place entirely, of flying to a new plant beyond the reach of whatever is hunting here. The alarm is both an immediate warning and a long-range command to evacuate the bloodline. This effect has been shown not only in the controlled calm of the laboratory, but under real field conditions, with colonies exposed to the alarm pheromone, producing more winged young out in the open air where the danger is genuine. A smell released by a dying aphid that reaches into unborn daughters and gives them wings. The colony does not just react to danger. Predators are not the only thing that triggers wings. Sometimes the trigger is simply too many aphids in one place. As a colony grows dense, bodies packed onto a stem jostling, brushing against one another constantly, the crowding itself becomes a signal. The aphids sense it partly through the sheer frequency of contact and respond by producing more winged offspring. The message encoded in the crush is clear enough: this plant is filling up, the food will not last, it is time to send some of us elsewhere. This is the colony reading its own population. No aphid counts the others. No individual knows the total. But through the simple physics of how often it is bumped and crowded, each aphid takes a reading of the density around it, and the colony as a whole decides when to start building the generation that will disperse. It is feedback without a controller, the crowd sensing its own size and responding before the food runs out. By the time the plant is genuinely exhausted, winged daughters are already being born, already preparing to carry the lineage somewhere new. The pressure of the crowd translated directly into the wings that relieve it. Step back and consider what these triggers add up to, because it is one of the most remarkable things this animal does. The aphid colony decides generation by generation whether to stay or to go. Two wingless aphids, genetically identical, can produce daughters as different as a homebody and a traveler, one wingless, and rooted, one winged and built for flight, and which one they produce depends on what the mother senses. Danger, crowding, a plant beginning to decline. The same genome read two different ways, producing two different bodies for two different futures. This is not a fixed instinct. It is a conditional one, a living if-then written into the lineage. If the plant is safe and spacious, make stay-at-home daughters and keep multiplying here. If danger comes, or the crowd thickens, or the food begins to fail, make winged daughters and send the lineage searching for new ground. The decision is distributed, chemical, and made without a mind anywhere in charge. Yet it is a genuine strategic choice: invest in the present plant or hedge on a new one, taken collectively by a crowd of clones reading their world through scent and touch. An animal with no brain to speak of, choosing the shape of its own children based on the state of the world. That is not reflex. That is something close to judgment. The aphid can sense when its host is failing and act before the failure becomes fatal. As a plant ages or is drained or begins to decline, its internal chemistry changes, the sap shifts, the nutrients thin. The aphids feeding on it register these changes through what they taste and sense, and they respond the way they respond to crowding and danger, by producing winged offspring, ready to abandon a host that will not sustain the colony much longer. This is foresight of a kind built into the body's chemistry. The aphids do not wait for the plant to die beneath them and then scramble. They read the early signs of decline and begin in advance to build the generation that will leave. By the time the host gives out, the escape is already underway, carried on wings that were grown in anticipation. It closes a loop that runs through everything we have seen tonight. The aphid drains the plant and senses the draining, and uses that sense to time its own departure. The damage it does becomes the warning it heeds. A creature that feeds until it feels the food failing, then quietly grows the means to find more before the rest of the colony even knows the meal is ending. Now the aphid reveals something that should belong only to ants and bees. Some species have soldiers, a defender caste, that gives up reproduction to fight. In certain aphid species, the colony produces individuals whose role is not to feed and multiply, but to defend. These soldier aphids are specialized for combat against intruders, and some are effectively sterile, sacrificing their own reproduction entirely for the protection of the colony. They are the standing army of a creature we began the night thinking had no defenses at all. This is eusociality, the same deep social organization that drives ant and bee colonies, appearing in an insect most people would never associate with it. And it is the clone that makes it possible. Because every aphid in the colony is genetically identical, a soldier that never reproduces still passes on its genes perfectly through the sisters it protects. Giving up your own young costs nothing when your sisters are your exact copies. Their daughters are your daughters too. The same shared fate that let the colony warn and sacrifice now lets it raise an army. A caste of defenders who will never breed, fighting for a lineage that is gene for gene themselves. The soft green specks on the stem have soldiers. It is time to see them fight. The aphid soldiers are not large or armored. They are often the youngest, smallest members of the colony, and they attack anyway. In some species, the defenders are first instar nymphs newly born, and they go on the offensive against threats many times their size. When a predatory caterpillar invades, these tiny soldiers attack it directly, driving their stylets, the same needle-thin mouthparts built for drinking sap, into the intruder as weapons. They stab, they swarm. The feeding tool becomes a spear, and the newborn becomes a warrior. Scientists have watched moth caterpillars introduced into aphid galls be set upon by these first instar nymphs, the little soldiers attacking en masse with their stylets, while their unspecialized siblings continue to feed and grow. Some of these attackers already carry the next stage of their own development inside them, even as they fight defenders and growing aphids at the same time. Picture the scale of it. A caterpillar, enormous by comparison, beset by a swarm of newborn aphids smaller than punctuation, each driving a microscopic needle into its body, willing to die to drive it out. The defenseless animal we met at the start has a final answer to the predator. It throws its own children at its stylets first. Some aphids do not defend an open stem at all. They build a sealed castle out of the plant itself and live inside it. These are the gall-forming aphids. By feeding on a plant in a particular way, they induce it to grow an abnormal structure, a gall that swells up and encloses the aphids inside a chamber of living plant tissue. Sealed within the colony is hidden from most predators, sheltered from the weather, fed by the plant that surrounds them on every side. They have turned their host into a fortress, grown to their own specifications with the enemy locked outside. This is manipulation of a high order. The aphids are not merely eating the plant, they are commanding it, forcing it through their feeding to build them a home it never meant to make. The gall is architecture coerced out of a living thing, a shelter the plant constructs against its own interest at the aphid's chemical command. And the colony inside is often a single clone, a family of identical sisters living together in a closed chamber, exactly the conditions under which soldiers and sacrifice and coordinated defense make the most sense. A creature that builds its castle by whispering to the plant in chemicals until the plant grows the walls itself. And inside those walls, as we are about to see, the colony keeps order and guards the door. A sealed gall has one weakness, the opening through which the colony must eventually leave. And the soldiers know it. The gall stays tightly closed for weeks, sometimes months, but at some point the aphids must cut a small hole in it, the ostiole, through which the winged migrants will exit to find new plants. That hole is the fortress's vulnerability. Any opening, any breach in the wall is a weak point where predators can get in. So the colony does something that looks unmistakably like military thinking. The soldiers gather near the opening while the ordinary aphids keep their distance from it. Researchers studying social aphids in their spiral galls found exactly this arrangement. The morphologically specialized soldiers, the ones best equipped to fight, position near the dangerous gap, while the non-soldiers cluster away. From the breach in the safer interior, the defenders hold the gate, the breeders stay back. It is the logic of a garrison carried out by insects in a chamber of plant tissue. The strong stand where the danger is, the vulnerable shelter behind them. No one assigned the positions. The colony simply organizes itself soldier to the door so that the one necessary weakness in the wall is the most heavily defended point of all. A castle, a gate, and a guard upon the gate, built and manned by an insect we keep underestimating. If the fortress is damaged, the colony rebuilds it together. When a gall is breached or torn, the aphids inside can prompt the plant to repair the wound, healing the wall through new growth that closes the gap. The soldiers of some species are known to repair their gall through this kind of complementary regrowth, stimulating the plant to seal damage and restore the chamber's protection. The colony does not abandon a broken home, it mends it, using the same chemical command over the plant that built the gall in the first place. Think of what this requires. The aphids must detect the damage, respond to it collectively, and coax the plant into directing its growth toward the breach. A coordinated act of construction performed by a crowd of insects with no architect, no foreman, no plan written anywhere. Just clones reading the state of their shared home and acting to restore it. A wound in the wall, and the colony closing it from within, whispering to the plant until the gap grows shut again. The gall formers do not just inhabit a fortress. They maintain it, defend its gate, repair its walls, manage it like the collective property it is. For an animal this small, it is a startling degree of order. And it is about to get stranger because the aphid's cleverness does not stop at its own kind. It reaches into the minds of other animals entirely. Here, the aphid does something that crosses a line you would not expect it to reach. It manipulates the brain chemistry of another species to make that species protect it. Many aphids are tended by ants who drink their honeydew. But the relationship is not simple charity. Researchers studying one aphid species and its attending ants found that the aphid's honeydew contained a large amount of dopamine. And when they tested the effect, it was dopamine that increased the aggressiveness of the ant. Workers. The aphid, in other words, laces its honeydew with a compound that makes its ant guardians more aggressive, more willing to fight off the aphid's predators. This is chemical manipulation of behavior performed by an aphid on an ant. The aphid is not just paying the ant in sugar, it is dosing the ant with a neuroactive substance that sharpens the ant's defense of the very aphid producing it. The bodyguard is being pharmacologically encouraged to guard more fiercely by the one it guards. The scientists suggested this manipulation may even prevent the ants from cheating, keeping the mutual relationship stable by chemically tilting the ant toward protection. The aphid secures its own security by editing its protector's aggression, one sweet drug droplet at a time. A soft insect on a stem reaching into the nervous system of a larger animal and turning the dial toward defend me. The aphid does not just produce honeydew. It controls when and to whom it gives it, and uses that control as leverage. Aphids that depend on ant attendance can manage their honeydew with surprising precision. They can hold a droplet, keeping it ready, and even retract it back if the ant's attention is delayed, withholding the reward until the attendant arrives to collect it properly. The honeydew is not simply leaking out as waste. It is being offered, presented, and if necessary withheld, in a small, ongoing negotiation between aphid and ant. This turns the honeydew from passive excretion into active currency. The aphid manages its payment the way a careful merchant manages a sale: produce the goods, hold them ready, deliver them to the right customer at the right moment, take them back if the deal stalls. A creature dripping sugar from behind it, turns out, has fine control over the dripping. And there is real strategy in it. By holding and offering deliberately, the aphid keeps the ant engaged, keeps the relationship transactional and active, ensures the protection keeps coming. The payment is managed to maximize the protection it buys. The aphid is not merely farmed by ants, as we will see. It is also quietly doing some negotiating of its own, controlling the one thing the ant actually wants. The same alarm pheromone that warns the colony does double duty. It summons the ants to the rescue. When predators or parasites threaten aphids, release their alarm chemicals, and those signals do not only alert fellow aphids to flee, they also notify the attending ants that danger has arrived, calling the bodyguards to come to the defense. The aphid's distress signal is read by two audiences at once, its own kind who scatter, and its ant farmers who charge in to fight. It is an elegant economy of signal. One chemical alarm, two responses: the vulnerable aphids retreat and the armed ants advance. The aphid does not need a separate call for help. The same scent that means flee to a sister means attack to a guardian, a single cry that empties the colony of the weak and fills it with the strong. Picture the moment a ladybug lands on an ant-tended colony. The aphids release their alarm. Some drop and scatter, and the ants, reading the same signal, swarm up to meet the intruder, driving it off the plant in defense of the herd they depend on. The aphid has turned its panic into a command structure, frightening its own kind into safety while mobilizing another species into war, all with one molecule. Many aphids run a life cycle so elaborate it sounds invented, alternating by season between two entirely different species of plant. In these species, the aphids spend part of the year on one kind of host, often a particular tree, and another part of the year on a completely different kind, frequently an herbaceous plant far away. The winged generations migrate between them, leaving the primary host for the secondary one as the season turns, then returning later in the year. Two plants, two homes, linked by flights across the open air, the whole pattern timed to the rhythm of the seasons. This is not a small feat of navigation and timing for an insect this size. The aphid must produce winged migrants at the right moment, find the correct second species of plant out of all the vegetation in a landscape, establish a colony there, and then generations later, send winged forms back to the first host to complete the cycle. It is a coordinated seasonal journey between two specific plants, repeated year after year encoded in the lineage. It means a single clonal line may pass its summer on a weed in a field and its winter as eggs on a tree at the wood's edge, shuttling between two worlds it has bound together into one continuous life. A creature that does not live on a plant. It lives on a circuit 2 stops wide, navigated on wings. It grows only when the season calls for them. How does the aphid know when to switch, when to make migrants, when to make males, when winter is coming? It reads the light. The great turning point of the aphid year is governed by day length. As the days shorten in late summer and autumn, the aphids detect the change, and that shrinking of daylight is the signal that overhauls their entire reproductive program. The endless cloning of summer begins to give way. The colony starts producing the generation that will lead at last to males and to eggs. The whole strategy pivots on the colony's ability to measure how long the sun is up. This is a calendar kept in chemistry. The aphid has no clock and no memory of last year, yet it tracks the slow seasonal drift of daylight, precisely enough to time the single most important transition of its life. Shorten the days, and the aphid reads winter approaching and prepares for it generations in advance. It is foresight, written into the body, triggered by light. The same creature that reads danger in a scent and crowding in a touch also reads the turning of the year in the length of an afternoon. And so we reach the edge of the aphid's intelligence, a mind with no center, spread across thousands of identical bodies, warning and defending, and negotiating and navigating, and keeping time with no brain anywhere in charge of any of. Not cleverness in one head, cleverness in a whole scattered chemical collective self. The wonder of what this animal does gives way now to the wonder of what it simply is. Step back from the details and look at the whole shape of the aphid's reproductive life, because, as a single design, it is genuinely beautiful. The aphid runs 2 completely different modes of reproduction and switches between them by season. Through spring and summer, it clones fast female explosive, copying a winning self again and again. Then once a year, as the light shifts, it switches to sex. Males appear, mating happens, genes are mixed. Biologists call this cyclical parthenogenesis, and they describe it admiringly as a best of both worlds approach to reproduction. Consider how clever the arrangement is. Cloning gives you speed and quantity, multiply a successful lineage without pause. Sex gives you variety, the genetic shuffling that lets a species adapt to a changing world. Most animals get only one. The aphid gets both, using each when it pays off most. Copy relentlessly while conditions are good. Then shuffle the deck once before winter to keep the lineage flexible. It is the kind of solution that looks almost designed, though it was not. The aphid spends most of the year as a copying machine, and a brief moment each year as a genetic gambler, and in doing so escapes the trap that forces nearly every other animal to choose between the two. A creature that refuses to pick, and that refusal is the engine of everything we have marveled at tonight. Out of all those generations in a year, only one reproduces sexually. The rest are clones. That single sexual generation is the rare thread that ties the aphid back to the rest of the animal world. When the days shorten enough, the clonal females begin producing a special generation, and from these arise the sexual aphids, true females, and for the first time all year males. These mate, and it is only here in this one annual episode that 2 aphids combine their genes the way most animals do all the time. For the aphid, sex is not the rule. It is the exception, a single chapter in a long book, otherwise written entirely in copies. There is something quietly moving in how rare it is. An aphid lineage can pass through dozens of generations, an entire summer of life, without a single male appearing. And then, once briefly, the males arrive, mating happens, and the genetic deck is reshuffled before the cold comes. One generation out of many. One moment of mixing in a year of cloning. And that one sexual generation exists to do something the clones cannot, to produce the egg. The hard, waiting, winter-proof egg that the whole summer of copying has been building toward without ever showing it. The clones of summer give live birth. But the sexual generation does something none of them could. It lays an egg built to survive the cold that would kill them all. After the autumn mating, the sexual females lay eggs, and these are not the soft, fast-hatching eggs of an insect in a hurry. They are frost-resistant, armored against freezing, designed to endure months of winter when no aphid could survive feeding on a frozen plant. The entire roaring summer colony, all those billions of soft clonal bodies, funnels down at last to this. A scattering of tough, cold-proof eggs, waiting out the season that ends every other form of the aphid. It is a profound narrowing. The colony that drained whole fields, that built galls and raised soldiers and farmed ants, reduces in the end to a few hardy eggs glued to a stem, holding the entire lineage in suspension through the dark of the year. Everything the summer built is packed into them. Picture the bare winter twig, stripped of leaves, stripped of life, and on it, almost invisible, the small dark eggs that contain next summer's billions. The whole green tide dormant, waiting in a shell built to outlast the frost. The aphid that cannot bear cold has made just once a year the one thing that can. Those eggs do not hatch when laid. They wait through the entire winter in a deep biological pause for months on end. The frost-resistant eggs enter a state of diapause, a suspended dormancy, and remain there through the cold season until spring conditions finally release them. Months pass. The world freezes and thaws, and the eggs hold alive but arrested the lineage's whole future, locked in stasis until the warmth returns. Only after that long wait, after the cold has fully passed, do they hatch. This is patience built into biology, an animal that spends most of the year multiplying with reckless speed, capable also of stopping completely, of waiting in absolute stillness for as long as the season demands. The same lineage that races through a generation in a week can pause for half a year inside an egg. Speed and stillness both in one creature's life. There is a strange peace in the image. After a summer of frantic copying of crowds and soldiers and chemical warfare, it all comes to rest in a few dormant eggs on a winter branch, doing nothing at all, simply enduring, waiting for a spring they cannot sense, yet holding the line, until the light comes back. And when it does, those eggs hatch into something singular, the mother of the entire year to come. When the spring egg finally hatches, what emerges is the origin point of everything that follows, a single founding female, and from her the entire summer. This first aphid of the year is sometimes called the stem mother, and she is the start of the clonal cascade. She hatches, finds the plant, and begins without any male, without mating, to produce daughters by the cloning engine we have followed all night. Those daughters produce their own. And so the whole colossal summer population, the billions in the field, the galls and soldiers and ant-farmed herds, traces back to her. One female hatched from one winter egg founding a season. Hold the scale of that in your mind. Every aphid you will see on a given plant through an entire summer may descend from a single individual who climbed out of a single egg in spring. A whole population, a whole green tide radiating outward from one founding mother through copy after copy after copy. It gives the summer colony an almost mythic structure, thousands upon thousands of identical sisters, all of them the daughters or granddaughters or distant clonal descendants of one, a founder and her endless reflections spreading across the plant she was born onto. From one egg, one mother. From one mother, a multitude. From that founding mother, generation follows generation, and through all of them runs one constant: they are all female and they are all her. The stem mother clones. Her daughters clone. Their daughters clone. Through the entire length of the warm season, the colony produces nothing but females, each one a genetic copy of the line, each one giving live birth to the next without a male in sight. Generation after generation after generation, all summer, an unbroken chain of daughters descending from a single spring egg. We have circled this fact all night, but here in the wonder of the full cycle it lands differently. This is not just a quirk of reproduction. It is a long, continuous act of self-replication, stretched across months. One genetic individual persisting through dozens of bodies and generations, never quite dying, never quite being reborn, simply continuing as copy after copy of the same self. There is a kind of strange immortality in it. The founding mother does not survive the summer as a single body, but her exact genetic self does, carried forward, unbroken through every clonal daughter, the same individual, in 1,000 new skins, feeding on the same lineage of plants she started on. A summer that is in a sense the life of one long-lived creature wearing endless bodies. And then as the light fades, that long single self does something it has not done all year. It makes a male and prepares to end. All year there were no males. Then, as autumn comes and the days shorten, they appear, and their arrival means the long clonal summer is ending. Triggered by the shortening light, the clonal females begin producing the sexual generation, and among them, for the first time since spring, come males. In some species, these males are winged, in others wingless, but in all of them, their appearance marks the great seasonal turn. The endless female cloning gives way. Sex returns, the deck is about to be shuffled, and the eggs that will survive the winter are about to be made. There is something almost poignant in the timing. The males arrive at the close of the year, as the plants begin to fail, and the cold approaches, not at the height of summer's abundance, but at its end, for the single purpose of producing the eggs that will carry the lineage through the eggs. Dark. They are the lineage's response to winter, conjured at the last by females who have cloned themselves all season and now finally mix their genes once before the frost. Earlier tonight, in the dread of the opening, we said the males would come and that when they did it, it would mean something was ending. Here they are, and what is ending is not the lineage, only this year's long chain of copies closing so that next year's can begin. The summer of daughters is over. The aphid just once becomes two sexes again, and on wings grown for the purpose, some of them are about to fly. For most of the year, the aphids stayed put, wingless and rooted. But the cycle demands movement, and so it grows flyers and they leave. At the turning points of the season, the colony produces winged aphids, and these take to the air to carry the lineage somewhere new. They lift off the exhausted plant, off the crowded stem, off the failing host, and fly, searching for fresh ground, a new plant, the next chapter of the cycle. The same lineage that spent the summer as motionless green specks becomes, when it must, a thing of wings and open air. There is a quiet drama in watching a creature built for stillness commit to flight. The aphid is not a strong flyer. It is small, light, easily carried by the wind, vulnerable aloft, in a way it never was on the stem. To leave the plant is to gamble, to trade the certainty of a known host for the open risk of the air, with no guarantee of finding another home. And yet the lineage does it, generation after generation, because staying means dying with the plant. The winged aphid rising off a spent stem is the cycle's act of faith, the colony casting part of itself into the wind, trusting that some of those flyers will find new green and begin again. From a still green dot to a creature of the air and back again, the aphid lives more than one kind of life. For the host alternating species, that flight is not random wandering. It is a migration, a directed journey between two specific kinds of plant made on a schedule the lineage has kept for ages. The winged migrants leave the primary host and fly to the secondary one. Then later generations make the return trip, a seasonal commute between two entirely different plant species that may grow far apart. The aphid must find not just any plant, but the right one, the particular species its lineage is bound to. Picked out of all the vegetation in a landscape by a small insect navigating on the wind, and it succeeds often enough to keep the ancient circuit running year after year. Think of the precision this demands from something so small. Out of an entire countryside of green, the winged aphid must locate one specific kind of plant, using scent and sight and whatever else it can muster, then establish a colony there, knowing in the only way a lineage can know that generations later its descendants must find their way back to the first host to complete the loop. It is a migration as real as any flock of birds crossing a continent scaled down to an insect lighter than a raindrop, navigating between two plants by chemistry alone. A creature you would not credit with crossing a garden, running a seasonal circuit across the land. Some of these aphids do not fly bare. They travel wrapped in their own wax, drifting through the air like tiny tufts of wool. Certain aphids produce waxy secretions that coat their bodies in white, fluffy filaments, and when these winged forms take to the air, they look less like insects than like floating bits of fuzz, pale and weightless, carried on the breeze. The wax serves real purposes. It can shed water, deter some predators, and protect the soft body. But the effect to the eye is enchanting and strange, a flying insect disguised as a drifting puff of white. On a still autumn afternoon in the right light, you can sometimes see them slow motes of white wax drifting through the air, each one a winged aphid carrying its lineage to a new plant, looking for all the world like seeds or snow rather than the animal they are. People notice them without knowing what they are watching, not fluff, not dust, but a migration in progress dressed in wax. It is one of the gentler images in the aphid's whole strange story. The fierce little farmer of ants, the builder of galls, the warrior with a stylet, also at the season's turn, a soft white drift on the wind, almost beautiful, carrying the future of the colony wrapped in wool. Return now to the arithmetic that opened the night, but see it through the lens of wonder rather than dread, because the sheer fertility of this animal is in its way magnificent. A single aphid produces somewhere between 10 and 100 offspring in her short life. On its own, that is unremarkable. But remember, the telescoping each of those daughters is already pregnant at birth, and each of theirs the generations overlapping and compounding rather than merely following. The output does not add up. It stacks. Tens of offspring multiplied by tens of offspring, multiplied again every 7 to 10 days all summer long. This is why a few founders in spring become billions by late summer, not through any single prodigious birth, but through modest broods repeated and overlapped at impossible speed. The small numbers compounding into vast ones before the season is half over. The wonder is not that any one aphid is especially fertile. It is that the whole system is arranged to multiply small fertilities into astronomical totals. It is the same fact that frightened us in stage 1 turned now toward awe. A creature whose ordinary, unremarkable broods stacked through the magic of nested generations swell into one of the most explosive displays of fertility in the entire living world. The horror and the wonder were always the same number. There is a moment in every aphid summer when the bloom becomes visible, when the slow, hidden compounding suddenly shows itself as a multitude. It is worth seeing as a marvel. A stagnant puddle of green specks, a single founding female, and her first few daughters becomes within weeks a teeming colony coating every stem. The plant that held one aphid holds thousands. What was a scatter becomes a swarm. The transformation is so fast it feels less like growth than like emergence, as though the multitude were always there waiting and simply surfaced all at once. We are not built to watch this without astonishment. The human eye registers the colony as sudden, almost magical, because our instincts cannot track the silent doubling that produced it. One day a few, the next a host. The compounding that math describes coldly, the eye experiences as wonder life, appearing where there was almost none in numbers that seem to come from nowhere. It is in the end one of the purest demonstrations of what life does when nothing stops it. Given a plant a little warmth and time, a single small creature becomes a multitude. Not metaphorically. Actually, thousands of living bodies, all descended from one all the same, one filling the green world they were born into. From one many. It is the oldest miracle there is, performed on a rose stem in a week. Lift your eyes now from the single summer to the depth of time behind this animal, because the aphid is not a recent thing. It is ancient, almost beyond comprehension. Aphids form a single great evolutionary group that arose deep in the Earth's history, a lineage that has been multiplying in essentially this way since long before the world looked anything like it does now. They were here when the great forests were conifers, before the flowering plants we associate them with had even evolved. The aphid's strange reproduction is not a modern trick. It is an old inheritance refined over a stretch of time the mind can barely hold. Set that against the small green speck on your finger. The thing you would brush away without thought belongs to a lineage older than the flowers it feeds on, older than most of the plants and animals you could name, carrying a way of life that has worked unbroken across an immensity of the cloning, the telescoping, the partnership with bacteria, all of it forged in deep time and carried forward intact to the rose by your door. There is a humbling perspective in it. We think of aphids as a nuisance of a single afternoon. They are, in truth, survivors of an age before our age, before the very idea of us quietly persisting copy after copy through more of Earth's history than almost anything you will ever touch. Put a number on that depth of time and it stops the breath a little. The aphid lineage is estimated to have arisen around 280 million years ago in a world of the late Carboniferous or early Permian, long before the dinosaurs, long before the flowering plants, long before nearly everything we ate. picture when we picture the living past. For all of that time, in some form, aphids have been doing what they do now, drinking sap, carrying their bacteria, and copying themselves through the warm seasons of an unimaginable succession of years. 280 million years. The number is almost meaningless until you try to feel it, and then it becomes vast beyond feeling. Empires of life have risen and vanished in that span. Continents have moved. The dinosaurs came and went entirely within the aphid's tenure on Earth. And through all of it, the small green drinker persisted, multiplying unbroken. Generation stacked inside generation, all the way down to the colony on the stem outside. It means the cloning engine we have marveled at is not just clever. It is proven tested against nearly 300 million years of a changing world and never once failing to continue. The aphid is not a fluke of biology. It is one of its most enduring solutions. A creature lighter than a raindrop, carrying a way of life older than the flowers, the forests, and the beasts. And still this morning on a leaf near you, quietly making more of itself exactly as it has since before the dinosaurs drew breath. For a creature that flies so weakly, the aphid travels astonishingly far by surrendering to the air rather than fighting it. The winged aphid is light enough to be lifted by rising currents and carried aloft, sometimes to great heights and over great distances, riding the wind the way a seed or a spore does. It does not need the strength to cross a landscape under its own power. It only needs to climb into the moving air and let the sky carry it. Caught in the right currents, aphids can travel far beyond anything their own small wings could manage, dispersing across regions, drifting to new ground they could never have reached by flying alone. This is travel by surrender, and it is part of why aphids reach nearly everywhere. The same lightness that makes them seem so fragile, that fraction of a raindrop's weight, is exactly what lets the wind take them so far. Their weakness aloft is their range. They do not conquer distance. They let the air do it for them. Picture them then, not as flies struggling through the breeze, but as passengers, tiny green travelers swept up into currents that carry them over fields and forests, to plants they will never have seen, founding new colonies wherever the wind happens to set them down. A creature that colonizes the world not by strength but by trusting the sky to carry it. Return to the deep logic of the aphid's two-mode life, because there is a subtle genius in it worth dwelling on. The clone is a way of keeping a good thing once you have found it. When sexual reproduction shuffles genes, it breaks up combinations as readily as it makes them. A winning set of traits, perfectly suited to a plant, can be scattered in a single generation of mating. The aphid's clonal summer solves this. Once a lineage hits on a genetic combination that thrives on a particular host, cloning preserves that combination exactly, copying the winning hand without ever reshuffling it. The aphid finds what works and then refuses to gamble it away. This is why a clone that suits its plant can multiply, as one researcher put it, without dilution, spreading a perfect fit across a field while it lasts, every copy as well matched as the first. The summer of cloning is in essence the aphid pressing its advantage, exploiting a good hand to the fullest before the season forces a new deal. It reframes the whole strategy. The cloning is not mindless copying, it is the disciplined exploitation of success. Find the combination that works, then make it and make it and make it until conditions change. The aphid hoards its winning hands, the way a careful gambler protects a streak. And then once a year, knowing the world will change, it shuffles anyway. If cloning keeps the winning hand, the annual sexual generation does the opposite, and that opposite is just as necessary. It deals a new deck. The single yearly episode of sex mixes genes, breaking old combinations and forging new ones, generating the variety that cloning by its nature cannot. This is the lineage's hedge against a changing world. A perfect clone is perfect only for the world it was made for. Let that world shift a new predator, a new disease, a changed climate, and a uniform army of identical copies could all fail together. The sexual shuffle guards against that, scattering the lineage's genes into new arrangements, some of which may suit a future the clones could not. So the aphid's year holds both impulses in balance. Exploit the present with copies. Prepare for the future with mixing. Cling to the winning hand all summer, then deliberately throw the cards once before winter, so that whatever the next year brings, some descendant somewhere holds the combination it will require. It is again the best of both worlds, and the more you look at it, the more it resembles a deep solution to a problem every living thing faces. How do you exploit what works without becoming so committed to it that a changing world destroys you? The aphid's answer is to do both in turn every year. Copy, then shuffle. Hoard, then gamble. A creature that has been balancing exploitation against adaptation since before the dinosaurs and still gets the balance right. Pause on what the aphid's double strategy means, because it touches one of the oldest puzzles in all of biology, the question of why sex exists at all. Sex is strange when you think about it, as a biologist must. It is costly and slow, and an animal that could simply clone itself would seem to win the numbers game outright. No males to produce every individual fertile, twice the reproductive output. By the cold arithmetic, cloning should beat sex. And yet sex persists almost everywhere, which means it must be paying for itself somehow. The aphid doing both becomes a living laboratory for understanding exactly how. In the aphid, you can watch the trade-off run in real time within a single year. The clonal summer shows what pure copying buys: explosive, unbeatable growth. The sexual autumn shows what copying cannot provide: the variety to survive a changing world. The aphid does not have to be argued into the answer. It demonstrates it season by season, balancing the two against each other and surviving by both for hundreds of millions of years. This is why scientists study these small insects far beyond the concerns of agriculture. The aphid holds in its ordinary annual cycle a working answer to one of the great questions of life: why bother with sex when cloning is so much faster? The aphid's reply is to do both, and its long survival is the evidence that the answer works. A creature on a rose stem quietly resolving a riddle that has occupied biologists for generations. Hold the two halves of the aphid together and marvel at the contradiction, because it is the heart of what makes this animal extraordinary. It is among the most fragile creatures alive and among the most unstoppable, and it is both for the same reason. Any single aphid is almost nothing: soft, slow, defenseless, crushed without effort, eaten by the thousands, killed by a hard rain or a cold night or a passing ladybug. As an individual, it is one of the easiest lives in nature to end. And yet the lineage, the clone, the species is nearly impossible to defeat, surviving pesticides, predators, winters, and nearly 300 million years of a shifting world blanketing every continent but the ice. The fragility and the invincibility are not intention. They are the same fact. The aphid is unstoppable because it does not defend the individual. It pours everything into the rate, the copies, the lineage, and lets the single bodies be as fragile as they like, because they are infinitely, instantly replaceable. The expendability of the one is the strength of the many. It is a profoundly different way to be alive than the one we know. We protect the individual. The aphid spends it. We fear our own deaths. The aphid's lineage does not notice them. And from that strange inversion comes a creature you can kill without thinking and cannot defeat however hard you try. Fragile in every body, unstoppable in the whole. The aphid is both always at once. We close the wonder where the cycle closes, on the realization that a single aphid lineage lives not one life, but several, transforming through bodies as different as if they belonged to separate animals. Across 1 year, the same genetic line is a wingless clonal mother, giving live birth on a stem, a winged migrant drifting on the wind to a distant plant, a soldier with a stylet for a spear, a male appearing once at autumn's end, a sexual female laying a frost-proof egg, and finally that egg itself dormant through the winter dark. One lineage, one continuous self. And yet it wears forms so different that you might never guess they were the same creature, the same genes, the same unbroken line. This is metamorphosis, raised to the level of the whole life cycle, not one insect changing shape as it grows, but a single lineage cycling through a whole repertoire of bodies, each summoned when the season demands it, each laid aside when its work is done. The aphid is not one thing that happens to vary. It is a single self that becomes whatever the moment requires: drinker, breeder, soldier, traveller, survivor, and then changes again. A creature that lived in the span of one turning year as many creatures. Water to wing the mosquito's 2 lives became 4, 5, 6, bound into one continuous existence that refuses to settle into a single shape. And now, having followed that life through all its forms, one question remains, the heaviest of all. Not what the aphid does or how strangely, but what it means for the ants that farm it, the web that feeds on it, the world it has outlasted, and the deepest puzzle of all, what it even means to be an individual when you are only ever a copy. Begin the final reckoning with time, and let it settle fully this time, because the aphid's antiquity is not a fact to note and move past. It is a weight to carry. This animal's lineage stretches back something like 280 million years, a span in which the continents rearranged themselves, in which the dinosaurs rose and ruled and vanished, entirely in which the flowering plants the aphid now feeds on first appeared and spread across the world. Through all of it, the aphid persisted, essentially unchanged in its deepest strategy, drinking and cloning and surviving, while the world remade itself around it again and again. Set your own existence against that. Everything you know, every name in every history book, the whole span of human beings on Earth fits into a sliver at the very end of the aphid's tenure. We are to the aphid lineage a recent and momentary thing. It was here doing exactly this for an immensity of time before us, and barring catastrophe, it will be here doing exactly this long after. There is a particular humility in being outlasted by something you can crush without noticing. The aphid asks nothing of the world but a plant and a little warmth, and in exchange it has earned a permanence we will almost certainly never approach. The small green speck is older as a kind of life than nearly everything you have ever called old. Here is one of the strangest dignities of the aphid. Long before humans tamed a single animal, the aphid had already been domesticated by ants. The relationship between ants and aphids is, in the truest sense, livestock farming. Ants keep aphids as herds, harvesting the sweet honeydew they produce the way a farmer harvests milk. They tend them, protect them, manage them, and depend on them, a full agricultural economy built around a domesticated animal run by insects, established countless ages before the first human ever penned a goat. When we invented farming, we were not inventing it. We were arriving very late to something the ants had been doing all along. Sit with the strangeness of that. The aphid is by a vast margin one of the oldest domesticated animals on Earth, not domesticated by us, but by another species entirely, in an arrangement so old and so refined that it has shaped the bodies and behaviors of both partners. The aphid is cattle to a civilization that is not ours and never was. It reframes our own agriculture as a recent echo of a far older invention. We are proud of having tamed the wild into herds and fields. The ants with their aphid cattle were there first by ages, a farmed animal then older than farming itself. Look closely at how the ants tend their aphid cattle, and the parallel to human herding becomes almost uncanny in its detail. The ants milk the aphids, stroking them gently with their antennae to coax out droplets of honeydew, the way a hand coaxes milk from an udder. They herd them, moving the aphids to better feeding spots on the plant, positioning their livestock where the grazing is good. They guard them from predators driving off ladybugs and lacewings that come to prey on the herd. And when the colony relocates, the ants will carry the aphids with them, even transporting aphid eggs to the new nest, ensuring the next generation of cattle travels with the household. Every piece of this maps onto human pastoralism so precisely it is hard to believe it evolved independently. Milking, herding, guarding, moving the stock, carrying the breeding line to new ground. An entire husbandry worked out by ants and aphids over uncountable generations, mirroring the herding economies humans would not invent for ages yet. Picture an ant lifting an aphid in its jaws to carry it to fresher growth, or gathering up the eggs before a move gestures of care toward an animal. It depends on, performed with the same logic a shepherd brings to a flock. The aphid is not merely eaten by ants. It is kept tended and valued by them, a herd animal in every sense, in a farming tradition far older than our own. That last detail deserves its own moment because it reveals how deep the ants' investment in their aphid livestock truly runs. When an ant colony moves house, it does not abandon its aphids to fend for themselves. In some species, the ants gather up aphid eggs and carry them along to the new nest, so that when the colony settles, a fresh supply of honeydew-producing cattle is ready to be raised. The ants are not just exploiting whatever aphids they happen to find. They are stewarding a breeding stock across generations and across moves, safeguarding the future of the herd, the way a farmer protects next year's livestock through the winter. This is foresight and husbandry of a high order. To carry the eggs is to plan for a season not yet arrived, to treat the aphids not as a passing meal but as a managed resource with a future worth securing. The ants are investing in continuity, ensuring that wherever the colony goes, its food-producing animals go too. It binds the two species together across time, not just in a single summer's bargain. The ant lineage and the aphid lineage travel together, the herders carrying the herd's future in their jaws when they move, a partnership maintained deliberately across the generations of both. The aphid, in the end, is not only farmed, it is conserved, its bloodline carried forward by another species that has decided it cannot do without it. But the farm is not gentle, and the aphid's status as livestock carries livestock's grim conditions. When an aphid stops being useful, the ants may eat it. The protection the ants offer is real, but it is conditional. An aphid that falls ill or dies or simply stops producing well can be treated by the ants not as a herd member to defend, but as a problem to remove and a meal to take. The ants will consume unproductive or dying aphids, harvesting them as protein, culling the herd of what no longer serves. The same ants that guard the colony from ladybugs will turn on an individual aphid the moment its value as a producer ends. This is the hard edge of domestication, and it is the same edge our own livestock live on. To be kept is not to be cherished. It is to be valued for what you produce, protected as long as you produce it, and disposed of when you cannot. The aphid lives under exactly that bargain security in exchange for usefulness, and no security at all once the usefulness is gone. There is something sobering in seeing the full shape of the relationship. We tell the ant-aphid story as a charming partnership, and it is. But it is also a farm with everything a farm implies, including the quiet culling of the ones who no longer earn their keep. The aphid is cattle, and cattle in the end are kept for what they give, not for what they are. The honeydew the ants harvest may be more than food. Recent research suggests it can also be medicine, and that this too may be part of why ants protect their herds. Some studies have found that ant honeydew is a notably strong source of certain peroxides, and that ants seeking to fight off fungal infections may turn to such sources when sick. The implication is striking. The aphid's honeydew may serve the ants not only as a sugary food but as a kind of remedy, a substance sick ants can use to help combat disease. If so, the aphid is not just the ant colony's dairy. It may also be in part its pharmacy. This deepens the partnership in an unexpected direction. We understood the honeydew as calories, sweet fuel traded for protection. But if it also carries compounds that help keep the ants healthy, then the aphid's value to the colony is larger and stranger than simple food. The herd does not just feed the farmers. It may help heal them. It is the kind of finding that reminds us how much remains to be understood even in a relationship this well known. Two species we have watched for ages, and we are still discovering new layers to what passes between them. That the sweet droplets may double as medicine, that the cattle may also be the cure. A farmed animal that feeds its keepers, and perhaps when they sicken, helps mend them too. Lift your view from the ants to the entire community that the aphid sustains, because this small drinker of sap turns out to be a foundation that a great deal of other life is built upon. The aphid sits near the base of a vast food web. Ladybugs depend on aphids. Lacewings and their larvae hunt them. Parasitic wasps specialize in them. Birds and countless other small predators feed on them. Whole populations of beneficial insects, the very ones gardeners prize, exist in the numbers they do because aphids exist in the numbers they do. Remove the aphid and you do not simply lose a pest. You pull a support out from under an entire layer of predators that have come to rely on its abundance. This is the quiet ecological weight of a creature we treat purely as a nuisance. The aphid's reckless fertility, the bloom that frightened us at the start, is also a feast, a renewable abundance that feeds the predators who in turn keep countless other systems in balance. The green tide is not only a drain on plants, it is a banquet that sustains the hunters. It complicates any simple wish to be rid of them. The aphid is genuinely destructive to the crops we grow and genuinely essential to the predators we depend on to control everything else. It is both problem and provision, pest and pillar, at the same time. Pull the thread of the aphid, and you find a surprising amount of the living world attached to its other end. Among the many creatures that depend on aphids, one does something quietly horrifying and reveals just how completely the aphid anchors the lives of others. The parasitic wasp lays a single egg inside a living aphid. The egg hatches within, and the larva devours the aphid from the inside, while the aphid still feeds and moves, hollowing it out as it grows. The aphid's body hardens into a swollen, papery shell, a mummy scientists call it, and from that shell, eventually a new wasp emerges, leaving behind the husk of the animal it consumed. Whole generations of these wasps exist, solely because aphids exist to be filled. It is a grim and intricate dependency, and it underscores the weight of the point before it. It is a nursery, a host, a living resource that entire specialized lineages have evolved around, completely wasps whose whole existence is built on the inside of an aphid's body. Take the aphid away, and these wasps vanish with it, having no other way to live. Picture the aphid colony again, that crowd of soft green clones on a stem, and understand that hidden among them are some already hollowed, already mummified, already incubating the next wasp. The banquet has its diners feeding from within as well as without. The aphid sustains the web of life not only by being eaten but by being inhabited. The aphid's influence reaches even into things that never touch it directly through the sweet rain of honeydew it drops on the world below. That sugary excretion does not simply vanish. It coats the leaves and ground beneath the colony, and it becomes food for a whole secondary caste of life, not only ants but other insects drawn to the sweetness. And where honeydew settles, a dark fungus often follows sooty mold, which grows on the sugary film and blackens the surfaces it covers. The aphid, just by feeding, reshapes the small ecology beneath it, feeding some organisms and seeding the growth of others. So the colony's effect radiates outward, far beyond the plant it drinks from. It alters what grows on the leaves below, what insects gather there, what the surfaces of an entire patch of vegetation look like and support. A single feeding colony becomes a small center of ecological activity, its sweet waste rippling out to touch organisms that never make contact with an aphid at all. It is a reminder that nothing in a living system acts alone. The aphid drinks sap, and a fungus blackens a leaf 3 feet below, and ants gather and other insects come to the sweetness, a whole little economy spun out of one creature's overflow. Even the aphid's waste, it turns out, is woven into the world. Now bring the weight home to us, because for all its ecological importance, the aphid remains one of humanity's persistent and serious agricultural adversaries, and that too is part of what it means. Aphids attack the crops we depend on across the entire farming world, draining them, deforming them, and seeding them with the plant diseases they carry. The struggle against them is constant and global, a permanent feature of growing food, costing enormous effort and expense in every agricultural region on Earth. This is not a problem we have solved or are close to solving. It is a standing condition of feeding ourselves an old, ongoing contest with an insect that multiplies faster than we can ever fully suppress. And the contest is genuinely hard precisely because of everything we have learned tonight. The cloning that lets resistant lineages explode across continents. The speed that turns a few founders into billions in a season. The wind that carries them everywhere. The bacterial partners that let them thrive on diets others cannot. Every trait that makes the aphid biologically remarkable also makes it agriculturally formidable. So we are left in a strange and lasting position with respect to this creature. We cannot eliminate it without tearing the web that depends on it. We cannot ignore it without losing crops to it. We are bound to it adversary and dependent both in a relationship with no clean resolution. The oldest enemy of the gardener is also, as we have seen, a pillar of the garden. We do not get to simply win. Turn now from the aphid's place in the world to the deeper questions it raises, the ones science is still working out. And the first cuts right to the heart of what cloning even means. Are the copies really copies? We have called the summer aphids identical clones, and in their genetic blueprint they very nearly are. But researchers have shown that strict genetic uniformity among clonal aphids is not quite the reality. Mutations arise, small errors of copying changes that creep in as the generations multiply, and given the staggering number of aphids a lineage produces, even rare mutations appear often enough to introduce real variation into what should be a perfect copy. The clone, it turns out, is not flawlessly uniform. It quietly diversifies as it multiplies. This matters more than it might seem. It means the aphid's cloning is not the dead-end repetition it appears to be. Even within a clonal lineage, variation accumulates, giving evolution something to work with, blurring the clean line we like to draw between cloning and the genetic novelty of sex. The copy is never quite exact, and in that inexactness lies a hidden capacity to change. It complicates the tidy story. We imagine cloning as making the same thing over and over and sex as the only source of difference. The aphid says it is not so simple, that even an army of copies carries small differences within it, and that those differences may matter. The clone examined closely is not one thing endlessly repeated. It is a theme drifting subtly across millions of bodies. This leads straight into one of the genuine open debates that aphids help illuminate, a question biologists still argue over. If cloning works so well, why does the aphid bother with sex at all? The clonal summer is so productive, so fast, so dominant, that one can reasonably ask why the aphid does not simply abandon sex entirely and clone forever. Some aphid lineages, in fact, have done exactly that, giving up the sexual generation and reproducing only by cloning, especially where they have lost the host plant the sexual phase requires. So the question is sharp and real. If some aphids thrive without sex, why do most keep it? What is sex providing that is worth its cost? Scientists still debate the answer. The leading idea is the one we have circled all night, that sex supplies the variation needed to survive a changing world, the genetic shuffle that pure cloning cannot match. But the matter is not settled, and the aphid, with its mix of sexual and purely clonal lineages, is one of the best places in nature to study it. The existence of aphids that have abandoned sex altogether is both a clue and a puzzle, proof that cloning alone can work, and a question about why it usually doesn't suffice. This is the aphid earning its place in the deepest questions of biology. It does not just illustrate the sex versus cloning trade-off. It runs the experiment in the wild, with different lineages making different choices, and lets researchers ask, with real cases in front of them, what sex is actually for. A small insect holding open one of the largest unanswered questions in the science of life. And now the deepest question of all, the one the aphid forces us to ask, not about biology, but about the very meaning of being a single living thing. Consider everything we have found. An aphid is 3 generations nested in one body. It is a partnership of 2 species fused into one life. It is one copy of a clone that may number in the thousands, sharing genes and fate across a whole colony. It is a lineage that persists the same genetic self through generation after generation, never quite dying, never quite individual. So where, in all of that, is the individual? What is the one aphid, the body on the leaf, the clone across the plant, the lineage stretching back to a spring egg or back 280 million years? The aphid does not answer cleanly, and that refusal is its final weight. We move through the world certain of what an individual is: one body, one life, one self, bounded and separate. The aphid quietly dismantles that certainty. It shows a way of being alive, in which the boundaries we assume simply do not hold, in which a self can be nested, shared, copied, distributed, and continuous all at once. There is something genuinely vertiginous in following the thought all the way down. We are so sure that we are each one thing. The aphid suggests that this certainty is a feature of how we happen to live, not a law of life itself. A creature you can crush between 2 fingers, asking the oldest question there is, what does it mean to be one? For all that we have learned about the aphid, some of its most basic machinery remains genuinely mysterious, and chief among the unsolved puzzles is the switch itself. How does one genome make so many different bodies? The aphid produces wingless mothers and winged migrants, ordinary clones and sterile soldiers, asexual females and once-a-year males, all from the same genetic blueprint, the differences triggered by signals from the world, crowding danger day length, the decline of a plant. We know these cues matter. We have watched them work. But the full mechanism by which a signal in the environment reaches into the genome and reads out one body rather than another is still not completely understood. The aphid switches between forms with a precision we can observe, but cannot yet fully explain. This is not a small gap. It touches one of the central mysteries in all of biology, how a single set of genes can give rise to radically different bodies depending on circumstance. The aphid is one of nature's most dramatic examples of this, and precisely because it is so dramatic, it remains a frontier. We are still working out how the soft green clone decides generation by generation what its children will be. There is humility in admitting it. We have followed this creature through farms and galls and deep time, and still at the heart of it the simplest question, how does it become? What it becomes is not entirely answered. The aphid keeps some of its secrets yet. Knowing what we now know, the human campaign against the aphid is entering a new phase, one that raises questions as large as the ones the aphid itself poses. As older chemical controls falter against resistant superclones, research turns towards subtler tools, manipulating the aphid's own biology, its alarm chemistry, its bacterial partners, its reproduction, potentially even the genes that run its strange life cycle. The same scientific understanding we have built up tonight becomes in time the basis for new ways to control or disrupt these insects, more precise than the broad poisons of the past. But every new power of that kind arrives with a question attached, and it is the same question that hangs over so much of our growing command over life. The aphid is destructive, yes, and also foundational, the base of a food web, the cattle of the ants, a pillar holding up predators we depend on. To disrupt it deeply is to disturb all of that. The more precisely we learn to act on the aphid, the more carefully we will have to ask what we are willing to set in motion by doing so. It echoes the hardest questions raised by our power over other small and consequential creatures, the dawning ability to reshape or even erase a species, and the weight of deciding whether we should. The aphid adversary and pillar both sit squarely inside that dilemma. We are gaining the power to act on the aphid as never before. The harder task, as always, will be knowing what we owe the web that hangs upon it. It is worth pausing before the end on how much the aphid gives back to those who study it, because this minor pest has become a major teacher. In the aphid, scientists find a living model for some of the largest themes in biology. The deep symbiosis of aphid and bacterium illuminates how separate organisms can fuse into one functioning life. The mix of cloning and sex illuminates the trade-offs that shape reproduction across the living world. The switch between body forms illuminates how genes and environment together build an organism. Again and again, the aphid turns out to hold in unusually clear and dramatic form processes that matter far beyond aphids. This is the quiet redemption of a creature we began the night fearing and ended it puzzling over. The aphid is not merely a problem to be managed, it is a window, one of the clearest nature offers, into how life solves some of its deepest challenges. The very traits that make it such a formidable pest are the traits that make it such a revealing subject. To understand the aphid well is to understand something general about being alive. There is a kind of justice in that. The animal we are most tempted to dismiss turns out to be among the most instructive. The speck on the leaf, studied closely enough, opens onto questions that reach to the foundations of biology itself. We learn from it far more than we ever expected to. And it never stops teaching because it never stops doing the strange things that make it worth studying. Lift away from the deep time and the open questions and return to the ordinary present, to the simple, startling fact that everything we have described is happening this moment just outside. As you read this somewhere, within a short walk of wherever you are, an aphid is feeding. It is drinking sap under the plant's own pressure. It is carrying its bacteria and its nested daughters inside it. It is releasing alarm chemicals or being tended by ants or growing wings for a flight to a plant it has never seen. The whole strange machinery we have spent the night exploring is not a distant marvel. It is running right now on a stem near you, in numbers too vast to count and too small to notice. There is something quietly profound in that nearness. We reach for the exotic when we want wonder, the deep sea, the far jungle, the alien. And all the while, on the rose by the door, on the weed in the lot, one of the strangest stories in biology is unfolding continuously, ignored beneath our attention. The marvel was never far away. It was underfoot the entire time. The aphid does not perform for us. It does not need to be seen. It simply continues feeding, cloning, surviving in the green margins of every place we live, carrying out its ancient business whether or not a single human ever looks. Step outside. Look closely at a stem. The story is there, alive, waiting in plain sight. And so we come to the end, and to the question the aphid leaves hanging in the air, the one it has been asking in its silent way all along. Think of what the summer clone really is. A single genetic self copied through generation after generation, never quite dying, the same individual persisting in body after body through an entire season, and that lineage reaching back not just to a spring egg, but through nearly 300 million years of unbroken copying, all the way to a process. The world before the flowers, before the dinosaurs, before us. In some real sense, the aphid feeding outside your window is not the descendant of an ancient lineage. It is the continuation of one, the same long self still going, that has been going since before almost everything. We began the night in dread before a creature that seemed to threaten the world with its endless multiplication. We end it before something far stranger and quieter, a form of life that has solved in its own alien way the problem of not ending. Not through any single body's survival, but through a self that simply refuses to stop being copied. The individual aphid is among the most fragile things alive. The aphid lineage may be among the most enduring things on Earth. It is still out there, on a stem in the light right now, feeding, cloning, continuing. The oldest copy of an unimaginably old original, carrying a way of being alive that predates nearly everything we know and shows no sign of stopping. The green tide was never really about the many. It was always about the one, the single, ancient, unbroken self, still drinking, still dividing, still here. And it will be here on some quiet stem long after we have gone. The full arc held as a contract throughout, dread, uncanny, or wonderweight. The script runs the aphid from terror, the planet-burying bloom, through the uncanny born, pregnant, nested generations. The bacterial merger into ore, the chemical superorganism soldiers ant manipulation up through wonder. Two-mode life cycle, deep time, the woolly flyers, and lands on weight, ancient livestock, the food web, and the closing meditation on what an individual even is. Every fact ran 250, 300 words, written for the ear, fully TTS formatted, with numbers spelled out and no symbols. Want me to deliver the whole thing as a single, clean file, tighten any particular batch or draft, the intro hook as a separate cold open variant.